The next step, people take those high accuracy ortho photos and step into the 3D realm with it as well. Digital surface models, point clouds, things like that, working in any sort of point cloud viewer, really any 3D viewer. It's a lot more valuable data, and it starts becoming a heck of a lot more time consuming too. You're spending a lot of time wrestling with point clouds, extracting all of that right data. The next step is going from that into clean CAD drawings, right? Whole point cloud by itself isn't of too much use raw when it's a 10 gigabyte point cloud, when it includes every leaf, every blade of grass, every car that was driving through there. You don't care about that. So getting that clean into CAD and putting everything into your CAD drawings so that you can use it in your typical workflow. And then putting that into a final survey deliverable. How do you combine that with all the field shots? How do you combine that with everything else that you guys do as surveyors, which is a ton of them, from pulling legal records, right-of-ways, historical surveys, and that sort of thing. And then the final step at the top is an integrated workflow, putting that all together so that you know it by heart, so that it's repeatable, so that you can do it once and do it again and know that once you send someone out with the drone, they've got the right set of checklists, they can just flow right through it, no problem, and you can rely on this system to work every time at the right time. So we've seen that a lot, and what I'll go through today will help you actually get to that top side as soon as possible. But to start with, you need drone hardware. How many people own a drone in here? Any drone? Okay, good chunk of you guys. But I always get questions about hardware. There are multiple. The first thing is always like, oh, there's a camera. What's the best camera, right? What's the best camera that I can put on my drone? What we have on the left is one that is the most common. It's going to be a DJI Phantom 4 Pro camera. Also the same as like an X4S, the M200 X4S. If I list just a million different numbers, they're all effectively the same camera. Even the Mavic 2 Pro now has the same, or a nearly identical 20 megapixel camera. But something that's integrated into the drone, it's specific, it's going to be a very good camera, but not highly calibrated metric camera or anything. And that's in the middle when you've got a large independent camera, whether it's a Sony A7R or a Phase 1 or something like that, really higher end photogrammetry camera. You're going a heck of a lot up in price. What I have, those all-in prices are typically for drone, camera, insurance, extra batteries, cases, everything put together. Yeah, you can get a drone for $1,500, absolutely. You're going to want cases and batteries, and these are rough numbers, by the way, so don't try and quote me on the prices, they're ballpark. And then at the high end thing, there's LiDAR as well. LiDAR is actually a really great technology, I really like it, except for that little price tag at the bottom. That's pretty high. But of the three, really both of the two on the left, the photogrammetry workflows, if you have a good operational workflow, you can get about the same accuracy with them, about 1/10 of a foot accuracy with both a drone-specific camera like a Phantom, as well as a large independent camera, metrically calibrated camera. Yeah, the bigger cameras are going to be marginally better, but once everything is put together, they don't make a massive difference in terms of the quality. They make a little bit of a difference, but we generally prefer the more drone-specific ones just because they're so much more accessible and so much more easy to use. As far as LiDAR, our kind of opinion with that is we're waiting on it. It's a very good technology with an enormous amount of not too distant potential, but it's really expensive. You know, really around $150,000 to $200,000 is what you're going to be spending to actually get a good LiDAR system up in the air. Anything that we've seen that's cheaper than that, you might as well be duct taping a laser pointer to a drone, so it doesn't really get you that much. But it has about 2 to 3/10 accuracy. Yes, it does have better vegetation penetration than anything else. But for us, the cost benefit isn't quite there for most people. That kind of ventures into that realm when I was saying with the science fair projects. It's not saving you time and money, even though it gets good data, it's not something that you're going to want to repeat because you lose money. So that's just our opinion on that. Next up with hardware, the big question is always airframe options. Do I get a Phantom? Do I get one of these big modular large multi-rotors like an M600? Or do I get a fixed wing? And the answer is, of course, with all of these things, it really depends on what you're trying to do. In general, the small multi-rotors are great because they are kind of a jack of all trades. Not of all trades, of all surveying trades, I suppose. They're a lot more affordable, they're workhorses, and they're just reliable. Once you step up to the large multi-rotors, yeah, you can carry bigger cameras. Part of the reason I don't like flying those personally is there's just a lot of little things that can go wrong, just various little settings or loose wires or things I mean, it's not the end of the world, but it causes a headache when you go out to a job site and you have this big complex piece of equipment, you hit go, and it just says error. Okay, well, what error? Well, error. And then you have to spend hours troubleshooting. No one likes that. That's why I'm not in love with those, even though they're big, they're capable. And then fixed wings, I actually do like fixed wings for the right projects. Fixed wings, like the Sense-Fly EV, is going to be the most popular, and in our experience, the best data comes out of those of the fixed wings. They're really good if you are doing very, very large sites. Well, very large. When I say large sites, I mean 150 acres and above. The fixed wings are really good. They can't get as accurate data as the small multi-rotors because a fixed wing is an airplane. It has to fly high and fast, whereas the multi-rotors can fly at 100 feet above ground and go at 2 miles an hour, go really, really slow just to get super, super high resolution, high accuracy photos. But if you just are doing topo over huge areas and doing that, regularly, then a fixed wing might be a really good choice for you as well. And then the last thing that comes into hardware is RTK versus non-RTK enabled. This has been a much bigger discussion ever since DJI launched their Phantom 4 RTK. It's a more expensive version of the Phantom 4 that has a dual-band GNSS antenna on it. So overall, we see that there are 3 workflows, 3 ways that you can use this. One is just ground control without any airborne RTK, PPK. We like that. It's very affordable. It's extremely reliable, but it's not quite as good as the RTK workflow. Airborne RTK, so RTK versus PPK, just to summarize, RTK being real-time, it has a real-time connection to a correction service or to a base station. PPK being post-processed means that you process it all back in the office. They have fairly comparable accuracies when used correctly. We just like PPK because post-processing it because it's a more robust solution. It's not as reliant on having a good cell connection or good radio connection. You don't care if a radio signal drops because if you post-process it, you can fix it. You also have more options with how you process against your base station, network base stations, whatnot, that sort of thing. Also, the time you lose doing it in post-processing, you're not actually losing much because you have to post-process your photogrammetry anyway. So you already have to bring drone data back into the office in order to process it. So we like doing it all in the office. In fact, we've gotten really, really good at a specialized PPK workflow for aerial data that we've been getting really, really high quality results on. So all of that, just kind of our recommendation in general, if you're just getting started out, our favorite drone, the favorite data that we see is the Phantom 4 RTK. It does cost on the order of 12 to 15 grand all in for everything, drone, accessories, cables, tablets, all that stuff. If that's too high budget, the Phantom or the Mavic 2 Pro now is kind of the lower end one of that. You can actually get really, really good data with that as well. Those are our recommendations. As a company, we'll process data from anything, but those are just the ones that we like the most and that we've seen people have the most success with. They're reliable aircraft, so we like them. Any questions on hardware? Yeah.
Yeah. So between RTK and PPK, would you say the biggest difference is going to be with how you process the data and use it, or do you also find any accuracy differences between the two?
We find some accuracy differences, and one of the problems with an RTK workflow is it makes troubleshooting the accuracy problems nearly impossible.
Okay, because it's the
real time. Especially with how a lot of these hardware manufacturers are, their RTK solutions are totally black boxed. You can't pull up the Rhinex data, you can't say, oh, try reprocessing it with a different base station. So it's one of those things that with RTK solutions, we've found probably 8 out of 10 times it works great, and then 2 out of 10 times it's just a foot off.
Yeah.
And a foot off, 20% of the time, doesn't cut it in our world. And we don't know why, because they're black box solutions. We know every single little algorithm with when we do the PPK corrections, and we can check it, we can make sure. And sometimes it works and sometimes it just doesn't.
And you just gotta refly it basically.
Yeah, honestly, yes.
Yeah.
And if you refly it twice and they disagree, well, which one do you use? Which one is right? So you need to start using checkpoints on the ground no matter what anyway. So all of that put together, the PPK solution is just more robust, and there's less that can go wrong, right? The RTK solution, my drone's having a problem connecting reliably to this. Do I run around and see if anyone has a high-powered Wi-Fi transmitter? That's a pain. No, you hit go and you post-process it because it's all saved in the drone. It works more often. RTK, technologically, there's nothing wrong with it, right? I mean, I'm sure you guys use RTK all the time in the field. It's a great technology. With this application, especially because airborne RTK is still, I would say it's still a very immature technology. Hopefully in, a couple of years, it does get to the point where you can real time push a button, it flies, no ground control points, and you can have near perfect confidence that that's going to come back and it's going to be exactly what you want and it's going to be reliable. It's technologically possible, but it's just not there yet. It's getting there.
Thank you.
So are you saying that with PPK drones, that all the data is actually stored on the drone? And so basically if the drone flies away or any kind of mishap, all your data and everything's just gone with it, right?
Technically true, flyaways don't happen anymore though. Crashes do occasionally happen, typically by pilot error when you program it to fly into a tree. And even then the data is stored on solid state memory, so actually the data we have, for better or worse, we have processed data from a drone that has crash landed before, successfully. But the crashes are very rare and flyaways are just unheard of nowadays. The number of redundant fail-safes in the software are incredible. Geofencing, radio link technology, auto return home features, auto landing features, it's really good. Doesn't protect you against everything, but flyaways are almost unheard of.
So what about insurance on things?
We recommend insurance too. Honestly, for a lot of these things, insurance to replace the drone, part of why we have even like the cheap ones, because repairing it might only cost a couple $100, no big deal. We also recommend getting liability insurance just because that's a responsible thing to do. We're not insurance brokers, in case anyone's like putting us on, a legal thing. Like, no, we're not insurance brokers. We do recommend you get insurance, but we're also not cops. We're not going to tell anyone if you don't have insurance. So good thing to have. Honestly, I say that very, very, very uncommon in general, especially with good training procedures.
How these new systems work with the ground control? You're almost saying there is some, but very limited, or none at all?
So the way that we process it, if you were to process a PPK project through us, we would require checkpoints. So it's not ground control in that it's not integrated into the project itself. It's used solely to verify the accuracy of our PPK solution so that we can catch blunders. I mean, if it's anything from like, oh, we screwed up the rod height on the PPK solution, so we can say, yep, we're 6 feet off like across all these checkpoints, so that we can catch it, adjust it, and ensure that it's accurate. And the other big thing is ensuring that it's always on the right data too. I'm sure not every project you guys work with is exact, perfect NAT 83. So we work with everything from, we just set up over this point, yeah, it's close enough, or all the way to fully local arbitrary coordinate systems, 5,000, 5,000, and we can still get the PPK solution to work with that, but we need a handful of those checkpoints to verify that everything works together. So checkpoints, especially put on my ASPRS hat, checkpoints are required just to trust the data. We really encourage that across everything. Like, we process data for people, they ask, how can we trust you? Our general answer is, don't trust us. Check it, verify it. Like, you're a surveyor, you guys are going to be putting your seal on a lot of this data. You don't want to just blindly trust someone because they have a flashy looking website. I like to think our website's pretty good, but still, you should set some checkpoints and validate the data, and especially as you start, once you get more comfortable using the system and realizing like, okay, here's what it can do, here are the limitations, that sort of thing, then, ease up on the checkpoints a little bit as well. So that's what we would say with checkpoints and RTK in general. Next step, just to keep kind of plugging along, is talking about mission planning. So what is mission planning? When I say mission planning is all of the steps of thought process that goes before you actually drive out to a job site. Now, if you've done this more than just a couple of times in the field, I wrote up a whole bunch of questions, but this is not an intimidating process. It takes 5 or 10 minutes to actually know what you're doing. Is this a good site for drone photogrammetry? Especially in this region, Arizona, New Mexico, the answer is more often yes than no. Big things like, dense forests are often a problem, or things that are entirely water can be a problem as well. Is it legal to fly here? Okay, you just check the FAA's maps, see how close you are to an airport. If you're super close to an airport, file the right paperwork, get your clearance, and then you're good to go. At what altitude should I fly? That's a big one that I'll go into more in a little bit. Altitude has all kinds of trade-offs. The higher you fly, you take less data, which means everything processes faster. You can cover more area, you can set fewer ground control points. But the flip side of that is you don't get quite as much accuracy. So it kind of depends on what you're going for. What's the appropriate overlap? There's so much discussion there. Oh, I fly 90-90 overlap with 2 double crosshatch flight patterns, and I use a 10% oblique angle, cover that a little bit too. So, I mean, those are the things that when we say mission planning, that you should kind of know what you're talking about. So why care about it? When I say mission planning, why care about these things? First of all, save field time, right? I said that right at the beginning, I'm saying it again. If your drone program isn't saving you time and money, then it's not working. So if you plan appropriately, again, it just takes a couple of minutes, you can set fewer ground control points. The difference between 30 ground control points and 5 ground control points on a project makes a whole lot of time in the field. Less ground surveying, because you know exactly what the drone's going to pick up, so you don't need to pick it up on the ground. Shorter flight times and no field revisits. That's the biggest killer of time with all this stuff, is no field revisits. So planning everything so that you get all your data on the first flight really, really helps a lot. But it also saves office time too. So good mission planning at the beginning will lead to shorter processing times, better accuracy, fewer photogrammetry errors, and a simpler overall drafting workflow. It'll make all of your systems work together nicely if you plan for that from the beginning. So let's just dive right into what some of our mission planning best practices are. So this is one of those sneaky things that you can take away. Single lawnmower flight path, 75-75 overlap, and nadir only. That means camera pointing straight down, no oblique photos. Now, I bet there are plenty of people here that have flown with something other than this and said that, oh, well, this app told me to do this and whatnot. And the fact is, I'm sure different people have told you different things, and we've tested the heck out of it, and this works in 99% of projects the best way. So lawnmower, why only once and why not, crosshatch? Apps often will tell you, oh, that's a 2D map, and if you do a second north to south pattern, then that is a 3D flight path. And what we found is that has absolutely no impact in the accuracy for topo data. What it does have an impact in is if you are doing a 3D model where you need accurate imagery on the facades of buildings from every angle. For example, if you were trying to take a job site and put it into a video game 3D render, then yes, that would actually improve it. But as far as topo mapping goes, no, it does not improve it. What it does do when you do the double crosshatch flight pattern is it doubles your flight time, it doubles the amount of data, and that quadruples your processing time. Because data processing is nonlinear. You double the amount of photos, you quadruple the amount of time it takes to process. So by doubling it, you're making your office workflow way harder. And then people try and compensate with that. They're saying, oh, it takes me too long to process this data in the office. I clearly need to buy a $30,000 custom-built computer to handle it. No, you don't. You just need to fly single flight patterns. You'll get the same accuracy. We've done tons of testing on this. Single lawnmower flight pattern is by far the best way to do it. 75-75 overlap, again, that's kind of your Goldilocks zone between reliability, processing. It's enough to handle a few skipped photos or even a whole skipped flight line without actually making you have to throw away the data, but it's not overkill. And then nadir only, no obliques. Again, if you were doing a 3D model for a video game, sure, tilt your camera up at an oblique angle. If you're doing surveying and you need planimetric data and topo data, nadir only is plenty. It'll make everyone's life easier throughout the whole process.
2 little additions. This step is actually better in the field because you can see things like overhead power lines, which you can't see here. And number 2 is wind direction. You don't want to face the path of the longest extent into or away from the wind. You want to go across the wind.
Yep.
So that way you get a more consistent photogrammetry and flight pattern, and you're not wasting your battery before you get the job done.
Yep, great. So a couple of things on that. First of all, what we recommend for before and after, plan it in the office and then adjust it as necessary in the field. Part of the reason we say plan in the office is because you can download everything with a reliable internet connection. I'm sure you've all been to job sites where there is not a good internet connection and not good cell service, and for us, that sucks. So our whole workflow is designed to work in super, super remote internet denied areas. That means you plan the mission beforehand, save it to your iPad, and it has absolutely no impact. You don't need cell service, you don't need a hotspot. If you're in the pit of a quarry and you've got no cell service, doesn't matter. It works. So that's why we always like planning it beforehand. But you're right, as far as having a final check in the field for looking for power lines, critical. Really, really important. That's on all of our checklists, which I'll cover in a second. As far as wind direction, we've seen mixed results. It's mostly a safety thing with that. Usually, yeah, you're right. You know, we say don't try and fly into the wind at the beginning, but I've heard multiple opinions, so I'm not going to plant my flag too strongly on that one. I'll let other people carry that one. Honestly, what I care most about is the data too. That's my number one. Data and reliability of these flights. For what it's worth, I've seen probably close to 5,000 flights, and I've heard of even a lot of people come to us after they've crashed a drone. I've never heard of a drone failure caused by wind. Anecdotal, I know, but worth something. So the end result of all of this is there is such a thing as too much data. Some people will say, oh, always get more data, more data, more data, more data. You can always use it. Well, that would be true if computer processing were free, which it's not, if your time were free, which it's not, and if your people's time was free, which it's not. Because of that, more data equals more time, more cost. So there is such a thing as too much data. More time in the field, longer processing times. Your files get so big that you might blow up your internal network. You have problems transferring it. You can't open it in all the right software. You can even get some possibly erroneous matches in photogrammetry. So one of the solutions is counterintuitively, flying higher is often better than flying lower. Flying higher can occasionally get you better accuracy than flying lower, depending on some other circumstances like the type of vegetation that's there and your quantity and distribution of ground control points. If you don't set enough ground control points, flying higher improves your accuracy. And I'll cover that in just a second too, once you get into ground control points a bit more. Just giving you some projects examples that we've seen of bad mission planning. You know, having just enough overlap is important too, right? Like, this is a project someone submitted to us and said, hey, here's this, we need you to process this. And we basically turned back around and said, no, we can't do anything with that. These areas kind of right here, where it goes down to just a single flight line, there's not even nearly enough data there to actually recreate reliably a 3D surface. Same thing here and here. And then over here, they have so much data that it's kind of unnecessary. But it's just, this to me is like it's a sign of a project where they don't actually know exactly what they're doing or why they're doing it yet. And it's so easy to fix it too. Just draw the box a little bit bigger when you're planning your autopilot missions. Things like high relief projects too. This is another one that we see in mission planning a lot. There will be an impact from high relief projects where you get really good accuracy up here, probably a tenth of a foot or something. And this is a profile view, by the way. So as the ground drops down, the drone stays at the same level. It's a little bit further away, you get a little bit less accuracy. Typically, that's not the end of the world at all, but there are autopilot apps out there that can do terrain tracking. So if you have more than, call it 100 feet of elevation change in a project, having an autopilot app that will actually follow the terrain can actually help get you consistent accuracy, consistent resolution throughout the whole project. Some other things that we see, just interesting things with flight planning, are features that can split photogrammetry projects. This one, normally we say about 5 ground control points per flight battery. This was a site with 5 ground control points, but there's this big river in the middle that actually splits the project in 2. Water, you can't accurately reconstruct water with photogrammetry, so really you want to have some ground control points on either side of the project. Those are just a few minor examples that you kind of learn when mission planning, how to set up your flight patterns and how to set up your ground control points. So with that, let's dive into what I think probably the most important thing for mission planning is, and the most important thing for accuracy is, which is setting your ground control points and your checkpoints. So, for starters, accuracy expectations for project planning. This is approximately what we see when we process data. Assuming everything else is done right, which usually it is, we see about this. Now what you will notice is that 100 feet above ground, you are looking at 10th of a foot vertical and better than a 10th horizontal. We've actually seen quite a bit better than a 10th sometimes, but it has to be all the right conditions, good lighting, hardscape, not on grass or anything like that. And the downside to this is that you can only cover about 5 acres per battery because you're flying so much lower and slower. Now you go up to 400 feet, you can cover 50 acres, actually sometimes a little bit more than that in a single flight, and you'll be getting about 3/10 of a foot horizontal, 4/10 of a foot vertical. Again, typically we actually exceed that, but at least on our marketing materials, I don't like promising it because it can sometimes not get quite that good. But if all you're doing is 1 foot contours, or heck, even less than that, over a huge area, then you want to fly at 400 feet. And in fact, like if you're doing those same 50 acres, what would take you a single 17-minute flight to do a 50-acre topo, and said, no, I want the 10th of a foot accuracy, I'm going to do it at 100 feet. All of a sudden, you need to use 10 flight batteries, which means you need to either buy 10 batteries or charge them in the field or come back day after day. And all of a sudden, that what would have taken 17 minutes now is taking you multiple days. So that's one of those examples of what I mean by that. Oftentimes, it makes more sense to fly high. And the other big thing is ground control too. Ground control, the higher you fly, the fewer ground control points you have to set. This is a kind of rule of thumb that we've put together for the Phantom 4 Pro and Mavic 2 Pro, that approximately, depending on flight altitude, if you fly at 100 feet, you want to set 5 targets per 5 acres. If you fly at 400 feet, you want to set 5 targets per 50 acres. That's a big difference. Again, let's go to that 50-acre project site. If you're doing it at 100 feet, you need to set 50 targets, which is going to take you a long, long time in the field. But if you just need your 1 foot topo for that project, fly at 400 and you can get away with 5 targets. This also assumes a non-RTK workflow. So when you do not have any RTK, airborne RTK whatsoever, this is what we recommend for RTK, or for non-RTK. Any questions on that? Kind of ground control points, quantity, that sort of thing?
Well, the flying altitude on this, we lack a lot of flat land around. So when you're working with some good slopes,
Yep.
how do you maintain a elevation, or do you maintain a distance above ground?
So that's, to go back to this, there are 2
Yes.
ways to do it. The typical autopilot, the standard version, is it'll take off and it'll stay at a fixed altitude above its takeoff point.
All right.
Now, if you have, I would say, less than 50-foot elevation change over a project, that's absolutely fine. Totally fine, no problem whatsoever. We do a lot of projects in California. We've done individual projects that have over 1,300 feet of elevation change over, a 100-acre project site. There's serious elevation. For that, there are apps out there that have what's called terrain tracking or terrain awareness, where it will stay a fixed height above the ground. So for sites with significant vertical relief, that is an option. I'm happy to talk offline about some of the different apps that offer that. Some do, some don't. Honestly, of all the autopilot apps, there are things I like and dislike about all of them. They're kind of, there's no one perfect one. There's one called NavPilot that we like better than the rest, but if you use other autopilot apps, they work perfectly fine too. I'm not setting you on that. Yeah?
One thing I know about the terrain awareness stuff is that it's all derived off of the maps that were made from the space shuttle flights
Yep.
years ago.
SRTM 2003.
Yeah, so some big land, changes can affect the terrain awareness. So
Yep.
some large pile of dirt that was put there before they surveyed it, you want to kind of pay attention to that terrain awareness.
Yeah, that's spot on. So the terrain awareness, at least as it is for most apps, is based off of the 2003 model year. So major quarries or huge earth-moving projects, it's going to follow the path of the Earth as it was in 2003. So we typically say that's a somewhat advanced feature. If you're working over raw land or maybe where there's only 10 or 20 feet of elevation change, no big deal there, you can still use it. But yeah, if there are huge earthworks projects, then terrain awareness can get you into a little trouble if you're not watching it. Moving on ground control points, other just best practices. with GCPs, we say, rule of thumb is 5 targets per battery, per flight battery. You want, if you can, in the corners of the project and then in the middle. And this is another one that we see mistakes on a lot. Fly at least 1 flight line beyond each other. So if you set your ground control points here, with this you can kind of clearly see that this is the area of interest here. And correctly, the flight was flown on the outside, at least a little bit more than it needed to up here, but that's not too big of a problem. The key thing is you don't want to have your last photo only go out to the edge. You want to go a little bit further to make sure that the photogrammetry works by having multiple angles on each point. That's how you get really high quality stuff. You also want at least 1 point in the middle, and you want your ground control points to be visible from all angles. So let's go into a couple of examples of this. This is a project that we saw with insufficient ground control point distribution. You can see you've got your red photos here, with also a really goofy, weird double flight pattern. I have no idea why. That's bad as well, but not that big a deal. A couple of problems. So they've got the corners, which is good, but nothing in the center, which means you're going to probably see lower accuracy there. But also, we see some points over here that are outside of those flight lines. The drone photos are all these red dots, and the blue crosses are the control points. When they're on the outside, that's going to lower the accuracy in this corner. Not by a ton, but often by 2/10, 3/10 of a foot, which when you're doing surveying, a couple of tenths adds up really fast. So this project would have not very high accuracy by our standards. Another issue is, the error and cost from all these suboptimal flight patterns. Here's another one that was kind of interesting. First of all, the double crosshatch flight pattern again, just totally unnecessary, doesn't improve accuracy. Especially, it doesn't make up for the fact that the ground control points are only right here. So on this project, we called up the client and said, what area do you actually care about with this? Do you only care about this area right here? In which case, why did you fly so much over here? All this data is not going to be accurate because you don't have your ground control points out far enough. In that case, this was just ballparking here. Probably 300 photos, a couple of drone flights, or maybe multiple drone flights. If all they cared about was this small area, they could have done that in 3 minutes, and the processing would have just been lightning fast because it's a lot less data that has to be processed. But you throw all of this at the machine, it'll still get good information here, but all of this will be slightly worse accurate. Maybe it's a 1/10 of a foot accuracy here, and then 2/10, and then 3/10, and then 5/10, and a foot off when you're all the way at the edge. Like that. This is another project that we saw. This was a client, I forget exactly what happened. He didn't even know much about ground control points, so he thought, I'll just fly the site 4 or 5 times, and that should make up for the accuracy without good control. Sorry, not how it works. This was another similar one. Ground control point insufficient. You can see in the top left that that one's outside the flight pattern. They flew it just a lot extra, without really knowing exactly what to do. And also you have these 2 blocks that are only connected by this kind of really narrow part here. So this effectively would be treated as 2 separate projects, meaning that we only have 3 ground control points, not enough. It could be okay, but you're going to see some errors there. It's just kind of one of those things that, had they spent 5 minutes just thinking about this, then you would fly 1 flight pattern that actually covers all of this too, connects it all. You wouldn't have done your double or triple or whatever the heck overlap this thing is. You would have saved yourself a couple of hours in the field, and you actually would have gotten good data. But instead, as it is, this is a little bit lower accuracy. Yeah?
Are those, because normally when it takes pictures, it's in whatever grid you twist it to?
Yep.
Are all these pictures, points that look relatively random, are those from the pilot taking the shots? Like in the middle? Because I can tell that there is some sort of grid between the 2. But
this is multiple grids. They flew a grid pattern and then redrew a new grid and then flew that as well, and it's all just layered on top of itself.
So is that what the green lines are? Those are the
Yeah,
different white lines?
exactly. The green lines connect them by time, so it just kind of shows the path of the drone approximately. So they did 1 flight line like this, and then another like this, and then it looks like they did another like this. Yeah, and maybe did 1 diagonal there. Over here, it's just overkill.
yeah,
It could have been done in a single flight. A couple of other things. This just shows an example of flights outside of the edges. This is kind of what it looks like in 3D almost, where you're only seeing those outside ground control points from a single steep angle, so you don't get the same level of accuracy, especially vertical accuracy suffers in most cases. As far as what targets to use with this, a couple examples of bad targets. Anything that's a single pure color makes it difficult to identify the exact center. Might only add a little bit of error, a few hundredths of error here, maybe a tenth of a foot, but all of it adds up. Things like edge of concrete or corner of concrete is really difficult, especially for a photogrammetrist that wasn't the person in the field, because if you say corner of concrete without having this nice little yellow mark, the photogrammetrist doesn't know if it's that corner or if it's that corner. So then all of a sudden your project kind of just breaks. It just causes errors, more headaches, more time, more problems. Chevrons are another interesting one. We see a lot of chevrons, and we've seen a kind of shocking number of interpretations. Some people mark the front tip, some people mark the inner corner, and some people actually shoot the center in between the front tip and the inside corner of chevrons. And the only thing that's consistent is that every surveyor thinks that the way that they do it is the way that every other surveyor also does it.
Right.
Sounds good.
Yeah. Although my favorite target of all is this. Actual project we got, and well, what, do we aim for center max? Do we aim for So all of these are just a little bit suboptimal. They'll work, but really standard checkerboard tile patterns. You can find the exact center point from any altitude. They're very easy to pick out. They're very unambiguous. That is just a good way to do it. Now talking about RTK, PPK data with checkpoints. All of that stuff is applying to non-RTK, non-PPK data, which is still far and away the most common way to do things because it is reliable, it is cheap, it is easy. RTK is becoming a lot more popular. What we found is that, like I mentioned earlier, you still need checkpoints. You still need check data. Anyone that thinks you can just push a button and ta-da, a magical drone does a survey for you and you don't ever need data on the ground is crazy, and they're not surveyors and they've never had to actually put a seal on anything. You still need data on the ground, but you can get away with a lot fewer checkpoints. The more we get comfortable with the processing workflow and the more reliable we get at it, I mean, every couple of weeks we introduce a new iteration of our PPK workflow that we can cut down the number of checkpoints that we need. At this point, we're at like 2 or 3 checkpoints for a couple hundred acres, and we can actually get away with that and still get really reliable data. We've gotten way, way, way better. So that's RTK PPK. Going into collecting field data. So now you've got your kind of mission plan done, you go out into the field, what do you do from there? First off, what we recommend, standard operating procedures, right? This is all about making this integrated workflow that's reliable. So that means project planning, control, hazard procedures, and all of that for all procedures for everything. So what we have is an operations checklist. In fact, some of you might have seen I have some of these at our booth. If you want a copy, please drop your business card off with me. I'd be more than happy to give you guys a copy of these or mail you one. Having these checklists saves so much time, and it's not because you might not know what you're doing, but it saves you the incredibly infuriating tiny little things that can cost hours. Leaving a memory card back at the office. I've done that before, an hour away from anywhere where I could get a memory card, and I just wanted to beat myself up because that tiny piece of plastic the size of my pinky nails cost me like 3 hours. So people, I've been flying drones for 5 years. Do I use a checklist every single time? And it's not because I don't know what I'm doing, but because the 30 seconds of checklist can and often do save me hours of time when you do it right. If you rush and you're just like, you drive out to the field and then you check your checklist and it's like, oh, check the weather. Fine, weather.com, go. Oh, it's raining where I'm driving. That's not good. Not a good day for a drone flight. You just save yourself 2 hours by taking 2 seconds. So that's why we like checklists so much. They just make it reliable. And if you have multiple pilots, multiple people, it makes it standardized too, right? Give these checklists, you know that you can say, hey, whichever crew's available, whoever can do, just grab the drone, go out and fly the thing. Like, use the checklist, you'll get the right data. So come by the booth or drop off a card and I'll give you guys a copy of the checklist if you want that. What does that include? It includes everything, checking your site restrictions, airspace obstructions. We were talking about power lines earlier, right? Oh, you should do your mission planning in the field. Yeah, have on your checklist, look up for power lines. Surveyors are incredibly good about knowing the ground, and they'll look all the way around and see everything and not look directly up to see if there's a power line crossing directly above them a lot of the time. So checking your weather, saving your flight paths offline so that you don't need a cell service connection, equipment packing checklist, making sure you've got your batteries, your pens, your whatever, setting up your ground equipment, inspecting it all. Like, all of this takes a total of 5 minutes put together, and it just helps to do it. So then surveying your ground data, procedures, loading, running an operation. You'll notice I'm not talking at all about how do you fly a drone, push your thumbs in this direction. That's because at this point, you don't need to know that. This stuff is so incredibly easy to just push go, and it just flies. This is the stuff that you actually need to know, which is making sure you tell it the right parameters to fly. If you want to fly manually, that's awesome. We encourage you to do that. That's a good thing, especially if you want a career in Hollywood. But it's not necessary for a career in surveying. So we have just a brief example here that I'll just go through really quick so we can get on to the office workflow. Construction site, project planning, so the 145-acre site that one of our clients did. They only needed 1 foot topo, so they flew it at 400 feet, 45 minutes, 3 batteries. 145 acres, they were able to survey it. I think they took half a day setting the control and about an hour flying it. There's the approximate distribution of the ground control points. There's their flight pattern. That red circle is a 1,500 foot radius, which is more or less about how far you can see a drone. So they were able to fly the whole site from a single location, and this was the final product. Orthophoto, major minor contours, I think those are like 5 foot contours, a bunch of other planimetric data. This is what a lot of the data looks like at the end. So, jumping into the office workflow. What time do we have here? 4:20, all right. So, what does the workflow look like? Well, there are a whole bunch of options. Photogrammetry, Pix4D is the big monster that everyone's typically familiar with. Agisoft Photoscan, another comparable one. Drafting line work, there are a whole bunch of options out there. And then finishing it in CAD, which is typically done in either Civil 3D or Carlson. So putting all that workflow together is how we put it, or is how we kind of get from flying a drone, you have 1,000 photos, to actually getting a survey delivered. But there's another hidden step in here. You should have quality assurance steps everywhere in the middle, because nothing would also get you frustrated, well, maybe not as much as the SD memory card. That one really, if you couldn't tell, that one really just sticks in the back of my brain. I lost a whole bit. Having quality assurance at every step means that you don't spend 15 hours working on a project only to find that it's inaccurate by doing a check all the way at the end, when it was something that just, a fat finger that someone typed in the photogrammetry process at the beginning. So having QA/QC steps for every step is pretty important. Yeah?
What's the icon under draft line work at the very bottom left? The green and blue.
Oh, this is a global mapper.
Global.
So Revit, Global Mapper, Virtual Surveyor, Troubleshooting, Mesh. These are a few of the different options that we use. I'll go into a handful of them in a little bit more detail. So we talk about this kind of surveyor journey at the beginning. And typically where everyone starts is, like I said, at the bottom, which is basic photos. You start learning photogrammetry. And then you start learning line work drafting, where you're actually extracting a lot of this valuable data. And the CAD finishing step is where you really put it all together, where you merge your ground data with your drone data. You eventually then seal it and deliver it to a client. So photogrammetry is stitching photos into interim files. Your photogrammetry software outputs are typically going to be a point cloud, an orthophoto, and a digital surface model. Anyone that's worked with Pix4D has probably seen these files before. Reducing that rich 3D model, which is going to be huge files, big, cumbersome point cloud files, into a CAD-friendly surface. So that means cleaning out your trees, extracting your curve lines. This is typically going to be in like a DXF style format, or maybe in a shape file depending on the software that you're using, or even just XYZ data. And then finishing in CAD, merging your field shots, creating a surface, adding your culture, annotations, sealing it, and having a finished drone survey that is truly indistinguishable from a conventional survey. So to sum that up, that whole process, what this looks like, you start with photos, ground control, and RTK data. It runs through the photogrammetry step, that turns it into orthophotos, DSMs, digital surface models, and point clouds. You run it through the line work drafting phase, that'll get you your 3D points, polylines, typically in a DXF format. You run that through CAD finishing, that gets you your surface, your contours, all the site culture, typically in a DWG format, at least if you're in a civil 3D environment, and that's how you get to your final deliverable. Diving into it, let's go in depth. Photogrammetry, what is in depth? Photogrammetry is the process, is the art and science of making measurements from photographs. Notice that, art and science is not a perfect science, but it is certainly not a perfect art. It takes a little bit of skill. And what it creates is that rich 3D model. And you can see this is not exactly what you want, because these are some of the just automated contours that will come out of Pix4D, and it drew all kinds of contours over that car, truck, tractor, all of that, which is not going to be very good for a good deliverable. You'll also see it's just oftentimes a lot of lumpier lines that don't look really nice, so you want to do some editing for it. Now there are a lot of different options for photogrammetry. You can use automated services. For those of you that have heard Drone Deploy before, Drone Deploy is actually really great software if you just need a fast, quick map, and accuracy is not the best thing for it. It's a black box, fully automated. You drag and drop your photos, and what you get back is an ortho photo. It's not going to be survey-grade accuracy, but if you just need to have kind of documentation of a site, honestly, it's way better than the other options because it's faster and cheaper. You could also bring it in-house. You could buy Pix4D or Agisoft Photoscan. That has a long learning curve to do photogrammetry. It requires a lot of expensive hardware and expensive software, but typically it can work if you really want to get into the weeds. And then, shameless product plug, you can hire a specialized service like us where you send us your photos, and we have photogrammetrists on staff that will actually do the photogrammetry for you. We have hundreds of thousands of dollars of hardware and software and licenses and photogrammetrists and equipment so that we can actually blast through all this and make sure that it's right. And make sure that your data is correct, and if there is a way to improve your data, we'll let you know. And we don't put out bad data. It's part of why I say Drone Deploy is better than us sometimes if all you need is a quick, ugly map, because we charge more than Drone Deploy, and we take longer to turn it around because we have photogrammetrists that are actually doing all of this, and if your data's junk, we just won't send it back. We've unfortunately pissed off a few people that way, but we're going to stand by it because we don't send junk data that you might rely on or that someone might say, hey, I thought this was a survey. No, don't do that. Yeah?
So, with the less than a tenth accuracy, around that range, if you don't have a surveyor to sign off on that, or, engineer needs it for, topo lot or land, period, do you guys semi-certify that this topo accuracy is within a tenth?
That is a really, really good and a really important question, and I'll tell you my answer. We work exclusively with surveyors and engineers.
Okay.
If you are some kid and you give us ground control point data where he just tried to hold his phone really still and get a GPS lock, we can tell that in a heartbeat, and we're not going to work with them. Because if we give this, we work closely with CLSA locally. We've worked with a whole bunch of different states, including the NSPS, to make sure that what we do is legal and standardized. And part of the way that we do it too is we only work with surveyors and engineers. Because this data, unsealed, is illegal under the vast majority of states. Right? If we were to do this data and purport to be a surveyor and imply that it was survey grade when it's not, that's totally illegal. So that's why we work with all these national organizations. To be clear, we are not licensed surveyors. We work with licensed surveyors and we do data processing for them.
And for the big mining jobs, and I'm sure you guys deal with a lot of that data, is that you have a licensed surveyor that sets all these ground control points normally, because they just de-license geologists, and I feel like they would have been professionals to work with in that realm.
Yeah, so mining's hairy. We actually don't work with mining companies directly. The only case where we work with mines is where it's a surveyor working on a mine, at least our company.
Okay.
A lot of companies are doing that. Honestly, a lot of the state surveying boards haven't shown much interest in going after the mines that are just doing it for internal volumetrics or something. That's not my call, but what we do, we are pretty unabashedly survey-focused surveyors and engineers. If you don't have a seal, we don't want to work with you.
Cool. All right.
And to be honest, we've actually tried working with a few of those mines, and they don't like us because we won't give them back crap data. And they're like, it can be plus or minus a couple hundred truckloads, I don't care. It's really low accuracy. That's not what we do. Our workload is honestly They would do better with a company like Propeller. Propeller's optimized for mining organizations specifically. And if all you need is rough, dirty, how many trucks worth of dirt are here, that's probably a better solution than us. If you're doing an Alta survey, that's where you come to us. Or topo that actually matters. So going into this, one of the things that people really ask a lot are, okay, so I bought a license of Pix4D, what are the best settings? How do you guys actually use Pix4D to get this reliable accuracy? How do your photogrammetrists do this? Well, I'll tell you the secret. There are no best settings. I'm sorry. There's no magic bullet, there is no magic software that actually just makes it so you can throw your data in and everything just works. To use a software like Pix4D or any photogrammetry suite correctly, it's not about the settings, it's about the workflow. Just like in the field having a standardized workflow, in the office having a workflow, where you integrate your checkpoints. You check for errors. You know what errors you're looking for. You adjust the settings based on the site, and of course getting trained and certified in photogrammetry is really important to this sort of thing. Because fixing problems, when we find it in the photogrammetry step, there are lots of problems for lots of reasons. And fixing it takes 3 steps. First, you have to know there's a problem. That's the most dangerous type about it, is where there's a big problem, where a huge sector of your project site might be off by 5 feet and you have no idea. And even once you find a problem, you have to figure out what caused it. And once you figure out what caused it, you can fix it or you can avoid it the next time. Because really annoying real world things happen. Photogrammetry is messy. It can't stitch water, trees cause problems. We've seen the craziest stuff happen where people will kick ground control points, or someone has done a donut on a job site in a car and torn up ground control points. Yeah. Things move, lighting conditions change, camera calibration changes. This is the real world. There may be dust on it. You may have thrown the drone too hard into your truck and knocked the camera ever so slightly out of calibration. That stuff happens all the time. So you gotta be able to just work with it. You guys are surveyors. You work in the real world, not in some magical, perfect computer box where everything does what it's supposed to. So the ways to identify errors are using the quality report out of Pix4D or other similar softwares, using check shots, and gaining experience with photogrammetry. So how do we do that? Let's dive right into this. Analyzing a Pix4D quality report. This is an actual quality report from an actual project that we got in from one of our clients. And this, for anyone that's used this is kind of the headline. You can't really read it up here, but I'll go through some of the information of what it says. So this is like your 5 top line things. Pix4D tells you everything's green, right? That's good. You've got, all of your images are calibrated. That's great. Your camera calibration number looks good. And what you can't see here is, yes, your ground control points. There were 8 ground control points with a mean group mean squared error of 0.003, so 3/1000ths of a foot RMS error. Congratulations, you just did a project with 3,000th error. You guys are really accurate surveyors. Good job. So of course you guys know 3/1000ths of an error, 3/1000ths of a foot error is a total joke. And that's not real. In fact, it's measuring the error from a ground control point to itself. So that's not actually checking anything. Now, if those things come up red, then there probably is a problem. But if you don't know how to interpret a quality report, that would give you a false sense of confidence. It's green, everything's great, but it's not always the case. Because if we look into this, this is the exact same project. This is another part of the Pix4D quality report that shows the number of matches between photos. Each one of these tiny yellow dots is a photo, and all the black lines is a density of visualization showing the number of matches between them. And what you can see here is there's actually this big gap where there are not a lot of matches. Now there are a couple of things that could have happened there. There could be water there. I don't actually remember with this particular site. There could be really, really dense forests that were unable to be matched. Or perhaps the elevation came up so high, so close to the drone, that it was unable to stitch that together. Now, if you only look at this, at the top line, you see green boxes. Everything's good. But you take an extra, brief glance at this with a trained eye, and you'll say, okay, this could be a real problem. We need to figure it out. Where were the ground control points set, and what's the area of interest? Sure enough, with this project, their ground control points are set like all over here, and this is what they really care about. And this was a lake, I think it was. So yeah, the lake's gonna have really bad data, but they're like, yeah, we just wanted it in the photo. But the accuracy, if you were to try and extract XYZ data out of this, it's gonna be, half a foot off. All of this stuff is gonna be tight, and this is gonna be really quality, but it just kind of goes into that ability to interpret and read a quality report. You can't trust these automated, just like everything's green, hooray, good for you, go have a drink. You gotta look a little bit deeper with that. Next up is checkpoints. We think you should have checkpoints on most projects or some way of verifying it. Independently measured checkpoints. That means not measuring a ground control point against itself, which is really what Pix4D kind of trains people to do. In order to be valid, they must not be used in photogrammetry. In a perfect world, you evenly distribute them. And in fact, if you want to get your project to have certified accuracy, there's something called the APLS Positional Accuracy Standards that I'm more than happy to mail out if anyone's curious, but it's a method for independently certifying the accuracy of aerial data. And the way to do that is with checkpoints. So you don't need to get every project certified because that's fairly burdensome, but having checkpoints, having something independent just to catch blunders, really, more than anything else, is pretty important. And lastly, we say get trained on photogrammetry. I've mentioned the ASPRS a bunch, the American Society for Photogrammetry and Remote Sensing. It's a nonprofit. We have no formal affiliation with them other than that I am myself a member and certified with them as well. There's my certificate. They offer a lot of really great training programs and certification programs that if you're really interested in photogrammetry, go work with them, get certified. This is not, Pix4D is a great company. It's the software that we actually use primarily with our photogrammetry, but it takes skill, it takes training to be able to use it right. And the last thing I want to talk about on the photogrammetry side is managing processing time too. This is a really, really big one because photogrammetry takes a lot of computer horsepower and a lot of time. And honestly, as we talked about earlier, a ton of this is decided in the field beforehand in that mission planning step. When I said, you fly crosshatch, you just doubled your photos, so you quadrupled your processing time. Now that's not going from 2 minutes to 4 minutes, that's often going from, 2 hours to 8 hours, or in some cases from 6 hours to 24 hours of processing time, depending on the site, depending on the size of the computer. And if you don't do it right, you'll have it run through, it'll do 24 hours of processing, sometimes even longer we've seen, plenty of times we've seen longer than that, and then you get an error, and you have to do it again. And an error that would have taken seconds to fix, just an oversight of one checkbox or one minor camera calibration issue, and you've lost an entire day worth of turnaround time because of all of that. So you want to make sure that you manage your processing time with both good mission planning, knowing that processing time is nonlinear, double photos, 4x the processing time. And our solution with all of this, honestly with so much of this stuff, a good workflow is worth so much more than just a good computer. For anyone that is thinking about, I want to buy one of those $20,000 custom photogrammetry rigs, you can do that, but I guarantee you spending just a day thinking about and optimizing your workflow will result in such better results than just throwing a bigger computer at the problem. Because the difference between a $5,000 computer and a $20,000 computer is only about 30% better processing time. Sure, it makes a difference, but it's not huge. It's not, a fraction of what it was before. But a good workflow can turn something into a fraction of what it was before. And also staging your processing, running kind of rapid versions early, catching those errors early, fixing them early before you get too deep into the process can all help save time. Ultimately, one of the takeaways from this is that photogrammetry is hard. Photogrammetry, as much as our friends at Pix4D, and again, I love Pix4D, great software, it's what we use, but they do a little bit of a disservice by trying to tell people that photogrammetry is just a single push button, everything works operation. It does take training, it takes experience, and we say this, we find errors in nearly half our clients' projects. And a lot of these errors are not the client's fault. I'll give you one example that I really like to point out. Let's imagine you're flying a drone on a nice hot summer day, and the drone takes off, and what you don't see is there is a nice, fat, juicy bug in the sky. And it flies into your propeller and gets smashed up, and that nice, big, juicy bug puts a nice, big, juicy bunch of bug guts on the propeller. that throws that propeller ever so slightly out of bounds and starts introducing a vibration into your aircraft. And that vibration is timed just incorrectly because of the way that it harmonizes with the photo that introduces this tiny little amount of camera calibration error. And by the time the drone comes back down and lands, that propeller's flung off all those bug guts and you'll never know. But in processing, you will notice a camera calibration error. And you might have no idea what it's from. So we see errors. That's just a tiny example. That by itself would probably never cause a serious issue with the project. But those things add up. It's a more humid day, so your lens is ever so slightly, like less than a pixel on 400 feet. It'll be changing it by 1/10 of a foot because of the heat and humidity has changed the shape of your lens ever so slightly. And a lot of that you can adjust for. But you need to know to look for it, you need to have it in your workflow to know what the problem is and then know how to fix it after the fact. So we say there's a reason photogrammetrists are scientists. If you want, go to ASPRS, really great organization. Any other questions I can answer on photogrammetry? I know that was kind of a lot, but. All right, so let's go to line work drafting. Photogrammetry is really hard in terms of science. Line work drafting, thankfully, is not. The problem with line work drafting is that it's super time consuming and tedious. So what is line work drafting? Let's get what do I mean when I say line work drafting? It is reducing a rich model to a CAD friendly surface. That means going from your 10 gigabyte point cloud orthophoto DEM down to a few megabytes, your few thousand topo points and curve lines and all of that. And why do we want to do it? Well, because photogrammetry outputs are just too big for CAD. Especially Civil 3D. If anyone's tried to import huge files into Civil 3D, they know it really struggles. So you can't do it, so you need to reduce it into CAD compatibility. They're too big. There's also a lot of data that you don't need, and not enough data that you do need, like ugly contours. We talked about this before. All of this automated data, when you just import a raw surface into any CAD program, it's going to have all of that ugliness there that you don't care about and don't want on survey. As with photogrammetry, you have numerous different options for how you actually go about this drafting process. The first is an automated software. Like I said, there are lots of people actually that are selling these solutions that use all kinds of different algorithms to try and classify vegetation and pull that out and classify cars and put points in all the right places. And it's cheap at scale, at least. It's usually an expensive software, but you can run it a lot. It's very fast, but the drawbacks are it's inaccurate and typically requires a lot of QA/QC. Not every tree will be correctly removed, some will be marked, and then sometimes it'll remove a pile of debris or something that you actually cared about because you're working for a landfill company and you want all that included, who knows. So it does require a ton of QA/QC. You can also do in-house drafting. That's high accuracy, reliable, known product, but typically it's expensive labor, especially, heck, most of you guys are going to be surveyors. You don't want to do just sit there and click for 3, 4, 5 days straight. And it doesn't really require much specialization. This is an easy step. It's just tedious and time consuming. Or, warning, shameless product plug again coming, hire a drafting firm like us, where we have our photogrammetrists that do our photogrammetry work. We have a whole team of CAD drafters they're really great people. Honestly, most of them are their first jobs out of college. They work for a couple of years doing this really kind of boring, tedious work before and getting a little bit more experience in surveying and engineering before they go off and do their job, which is awesome for us. And then they go to then the product goes to our engineers and finishes it. But because we have this scale and specialization and workflow, we have all these fast computers and expensive software that we can actually do a lot of this stuff for you. But you do have options. The downside of line work drafting, like I said, not too hard, it's just time consuming and labor intensive. So what are the methods of line work drafting? Well, there are a handful of them, and a handful that we like and a few that we very explicitly don't. First, you can draft on individual photos. This is possible in Pix4D. It was also made more common by a software called Datamate. Everyone's heard of that?
Called what, sir?
What was that?
What was it called?
Datamate. We don't really like this. This is very time consuming. Basically, you mark a point in every photo where it's visible, and it calculates the exact location of that point. Very, very high accuracy, but really the most time consuming of any method for extracting data out of photogrammetry. You could draft directly on the ortho photo. This is where you import the ortho photo into whatever your software and you just draw your lines on it. Typically pretty quick, but but it's going to be 2D data only because you're drawing on top of an ortho photo only. But if all you need is 2D data, that's a really good workflow to go with. Point cloud drafting. You can import an entire point cloud. Point cloud is one of the more rich and accurate sources of information to come out of photogrammetry, but this is also among the more tedious methods that you really have to spend a lot of time extracting data, canceling out the noise, but it's really good for extracting points. Or another one where we, that's 2.5D DSM and orthophoto drafting. This is really good. 2.5D means that for any one XY coordinate, there's only a single Z, so it doesn't work for like underground caves or anything. But it's a lot simpler process than working in a full point cloud. It saves a lot of time over that, and most of the data is going to be really good for there. So a really good line work drafting method, you'd actually want to use a mix of these things, right? For a lot of your topo data, you might use the 2.5D drafting to just extract topo points. For your 2D data, especially things that explicitly do not have elevation data, especially if you're marking utilities or something that might be raised or lowered, you don't want that as part of the surface, do it on the orthophoto. Paint striping or something too is often done on orthophoto. Point cloud drafting, if you have some areas with vegetation, you need to kind of look underneath the trees, it's a good method for extracting data there. But having multiple tools in your toolbox for line work drafting helps. Each one of them has their trade-offs. Some are more accurate, more powerful, but take a lot more time. The other are a lot faster and more efficient, but a little bit more limited in use. So those are the ones that we like, but there are methods of drafting that we don't like. First off is importing an orthophoto straight into Civil 3D. And why do I say that? Civil 3D is great. Well, as mentioned though, it doesn't handle big files very well. So what we often see is people will take these orthophotos and then they will downsample them into lower resolution, or they'll chop it up into pieces so that they can get it into Civil 3D, and they're losing resolution, they're losing accuracy. Spend all this time getting all of your accuracy nicely put together, and then you're throwing away your 3D data and you're throwing away a lot of your accuracy just so you can get it into Civil 3D. So we think that's a pretty bad workflow. There are other softwares that can do it better. And also a thing that really shocks me that it's becoming so popular among software vendors is what I call dumb decimation on a point cloud, where they say this point cloud is too big, it is too cumbersome, and it is too difficult to work with, so we're just going to delete 90% of the points. 9 out of every 10 points. So that way we cut our file size down by 90% so that we can actually work with it. Great? Well, no, you spent all this time on accuracy and data, and then you're just throwing so much of it away. Now your curve lines look just terrible. You're going to be missing valuable data. But it's really annoying how often I've seen software companies on their pitches say like, well yeah, the data's too big, so we just click, 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 and look, now it's manageable. Yeah, you just delete 90% of it. It's manageable, but don't do that. We really, really strongly oppose that method. So here are your good methods. As opposed to what softwares you can use, there are a lot. These are some of our favorite ones out there. Tobodot, VR Mesh, Global Mapper are really good for point clouds, same with 3D Reshaper. Virtual Surveyor and Global Mapper are good for that 2.5D DSM drafting. ArcGIS and actually even QGIS, any of the GIS applications are really good for orthophoto drafting because they're designed, unlike CAD, they're designed to handle these huge massive orthophotos. Yeah?
What about any stereo compilation software? Any work with any of that at all?
If that's not in our workflow, if you're comfortable with it, by all means, you can get good data out of it. Stereo compilation, depending on how advanced the software and what type it uses, I mean, it's still photogrammetry, honestly, and the math is all the same. You can get good data out of it. We found these to be just a little bit faster in our experience, so that we're a lot more familiar with. So yeah, and then after line work drafting, the next step is CAD finishing. So CAD finishing is turning it into something like this. There's a lot of data that doesn't come from the drone here. So what does that mean? The first step is, well, we got to merge our field shots and drone data. You're going to get some data off of the drone. Topo points are great for drones, brake lines, paint striping, edge of pavements, curves. I say occasionally because it depends. Yeah, Eric's smiling because he had a project that we did recently where some curves did not come out perfectly. Curves really depend on the shape of the curve and what data you need out of it and how high you fly. If you have 400 feet, you're not going to get a sharp, nice, 4-line curve. If you fly at 100 feet, you're probably going to get a heck of a lot better data. But it really depends on how accurate data you need, whether or not you can expect to get the curves out of out of the drone. What you get on the field? Well, boundaries for one, typically because, as you guys are going to be well aware, there are often laws in place that say you cannot do boundary from the air. I know that's part of an ALTA survey requirement, is all boundaries must be done on the ground. Building corners, typically you want higher reliability, higher accuracy than the drone can get. Also, building corners are typically either covered in some level of vegetation or building eaves, which drones don't like. Monuments, things like ADA compliant, ADA ramps, if you really need it to be, within a couple hundreds tolerance, the drone is the wrong tool for the job. But you've got a good workflow, you've got people that have done this, that have their checklists, they can look at the checklist and say, here's what's done by the drone, and here's what I get from the field. And they can do that and know right away that, yeah, go shoot your wheelchair ramps on the ground. Make sure those are measured on the ground. The 500 parking stalls, ignore them because you can pull them from the drone. That's how you create that really fast integrated workflow. So once you do that, you create your surface in CAD. Obviously nothing too magical there. You take all of your field shots and your drone data. We've gone through our line work drafting, so now it's a nice clean set of topo points and break lines. Create a surface, apply your custom layer templates to it. You want it to match all of your existing work, right? Your client may have really, really specific requirements of what color every single line is, things like that. Improving your visibility and usability, that means turning your single point that had a notation that said tree into a nice little picture of a tree, or your various arrows and whatnot. And then adding in your CAD-friendly imagery. This is another step that's actually a little harder than it sounds. We, at least what we do whenever we process data, is we'll send back two versions, a full resolution version and then a CAD-friendly version. The CAD-friendly version is using a compression algorithm that we actually designed to make something so that it actually is smaller and works in CAD. Now, as I mentioned, don't draft directly on an ortho photo in Civil 3D because you do lose some resolution here. That's kind of the nature of compression, or of the types of compression algorithms that we use. But typically, anything above 200 megabytes, some computers start to break down when you try and import that ortho photo. If it goes above 5 gigabytes, then I don't care. No computer in the world running Civil 3D can handle a 5 gigabyte ortho photo. So we create these CAD-friendly images that are still geo-referenced, still accurate. Instead of maybe a 1/10 of a foot accuracy, you might see 2 or 3/10 of a foot. But ultimately, they're really good for context. For when you send it to an engineer, that you have that imagery in the back that you can see exactly what's there. It's honestly good for QA/QC on your end too, to check your field work, to make sure, oh, there's a curve there that I totally didn't shoot and forgot about it, and it's super obvious because it's on that CAD-friendly imagery. And it's all optimized for context and printing, not for drafting. So having that CAD-friendly version really helps with the quality of your final deliverables and the quality of your overall workflow. And as we've mentioned before, final survey should look the same whether it was made conventionally or with a drone. In fact, it's something that I talk to a lot of people as well. They say, oh, we're having trouble selling drone services. I say, you probably shouldn't be selling drone services. Sell surveying services and use the drone to make your life easier. Especially because the drone, like your clients aren't going to know the drone is a topo tool. A lot of them will say like, oh, well, I only used L1 GPS for this reason. I don't care about that. Tell me, is this accurate? And give me the data that I need. That's what it is. And if you give it to them with imagery, they often like it more. And some of them will have no idea whether that imagery came from a satellite, whether it came from a drone, whether it came from a plane, and typically they don't care either. They care if the imagery's up to date, if it looks nice, and if it tells them the information that they need to know. So having a final survey that looks exactly the same whether it's made conventionally or with a drone. Now I don't know, is anyone familiar with the rules here? Some states have added laws that you have to start listing the sources of your data when you seal it. Does that exist in Arizona? I think it's someone saying that if you use GPS, you have to say, this is the GPS system I use. If you use a drone, you have to note it. I don't know. Yeah, sounds like, I don't know if that's a rule here, but it is in a handful of states just to be aware of. But other than that, really, people don't care. So lastly, we're running a little bit out of time, but creating an efficient workflow. So I'll go through this just in the next couple of minutes. Said this before, say it again. Your drone program isn't saving you time and money. It's not working. Start by knowing your desired outputs. We see this way too often. People say, yeah, I just flew the drone and we want to see what we can get out of it. Can you imagine saying, yeah, I just sent a crew to a job site with some tools, we'll see what they come back with.
Yeah.
It's not how it works. We see that way too often as people fly a drone, they'll send us tons of stuff. Yeah, well, I took 2 hours of 4K video. Can you make something out of this? Make what? You want me to make a pizza or something? I mean, I don't know what's going on. Know what you're getting out of it. If you go out there with some of those other checklists and say, I want my topo data. I want 1 foot contours out of this drone, then you'll be happy. If you say, I want to see what I'll get out of it, you're going to waste so much time and get so much stuff that you do not care about. Pick the right tool for the job. The drone is a great tool. The drone is not a great tool for every job. That is important to know. And the drone cannot do everything. Whether you're using a GPS, a total station, construction staking, you're using actually a metal detector, like there are different tools. Let me walk you through just real quick a couple of workflows that I've seen. This is an actual story of an actual client who shall remain nameless. It was at a fairly large engineering company, and the client had a nearly limitless budget. So they bought that drone up there. It's a Micro Drones MD5, I think it was. I forget exactly what it's called. They bought a custom $20,000 like a commercial grade Xeon computer. They bought a Pix4D license, which costs $9 grand or $8,700, whatever it is now. They were using Triple Business Center for a lot of the data processing. They had TopoDot for point cloud editing. TopoDot, another great software that is very not cheap. And they submitted it to us for processing, and it was, being fully honest, probably the best quality data that I have ever seen. And the drone program got shut down, and the guy left to work for another company. Because it cost about $80,000 up front, and every single project took 50 to 60 man hours to process. Because they had really, really, really good gear, truly the best quality data that I've seen, but a horrible workflow, and just no sense of how to make this a project or a system that you can use reliably, repeatedly. Guy left the company because they were saying, like, I remembered asking him, when he showed us this data, I was so blown away. This is really good data. Like, but this must have cost a fortune. He kind of laughed. And yeah, how are you going to make money off of this? And he just laughs again and said, there is no way to make money off of this. So what's my workflow look like? Well, day one, you fly a site with a Phantom, where the bird itself only costs $1,500. Maybe 8-9 grand if you're using the RTK. Shoot your ground control, do your ground surveying, you upload it to us. Day two, we do the photogrammetry, the line work, and turn around and give you your DWG files. Day three, you verify it, merge in your field data, sign, seal, and deliver it to a client. You're looking at, if you're using just one of those Phantom 4 Pros or Mavic 2s, $3,000 up front, 10 man hours per project. These are the type of drone programs that continue, that become more than just a science fair project, that you actually use them repeatedly because they save you time, because they save you money, so that you don't wind up laughing about So, final plug before I let you guys go. We offer all of this stuff as a service. You fly, the way that it works, you guys fly your drone, we process the data, and we turn it into these Catalina deliverables. If you want to see what those files look like, come to us. I'd be more than happy to talk with you. And also, if you drop off a card, I'll give you a copy of the slides that you have. We actually also have a video recording of this presentation that we can send to you guys as well, in case you want to share it to anyone in the office. I'd be more than happy to give you a copy of our checklist as well, our field checklist for best practices there, and a copy of the ASPRS positional accuracy standard. So, like I said, drop off a card or shoot me an email with your information. I'd be more than happy to get all of that to you. And with that, thank you all so much for your time. I'll let you go off to the happy hour, and I really appreciate your attention today.